So I don't want people to get too stressed out about trying to get the software yet and trying to worry about the software. And the reason is because the statistical software we're going to start to use in about 2 weeks. I'm going to be doing some of the stuff for you first, and then trying to get that through for you. And so hopefully that getting the software to work for you is the, thank you. Yes, you can annotate. Getting the software working for you is kind of, I don't want that to be a major concern or a problem, but it's something that will, especially if you're a psych major, it's something you really need to try and get done. It only took us a little bit of time to figure out exactly how to make it work. And every time we learn something, we get a little bit faster the next time. But we're going to kind of deal with this without the software for a little while, and then start working on the software. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here. Okay, let's get out of my physio class. You don't want to have that. Okay. So now, I have a very simple question for you. Really, very, very simple. Okay. So what is a fact? Okay, everybody, ready? I'm going to dump you into breakout rooms. And you have to come up with 3 facts. Are you ready? Alexis, you should have the program in about 2 weeks. Okay, that's when we're really going to start trying to use it. And so hopefully between now and 2 weeks, we'll get everybody either able to use it or able to use my computer with it or something. We'll get people figured out. That's the goal.
How do we buy it?
I'm hopefully, the campus says you can have it for free.
Oh, okay.
So you can buy a personal copy if you want to, if you have the resources to, but if you're struggling for resources, we have a copy that's on campus that students can use, and we need to figure out a way to get it to students. And I haven't gotten an email back from the folks that do that. And so I can try calling them, but they're at home, so they're not at their offices. So baby steps, working on it. Okay, so I'm going to dump you into breakout rooms. Okay, and so we're going to do 10 rooms. Okay, about 4 people per room. Okay, and so what's going to happen is I want you to come up with some facts. Okay, go. So click join when it's asked you to join.
Okay, so were we supposed to talk about facts, or were we supposed to talk about what is
You're
a fact?
talking. What happened to my sound?
Oh, you were muted. But was the group about what is a fact and you're supposed to talk amongst your group, or were you just listing random facts with them? Because I kind of did both.
That's what we kind of did too.
Okay, now we're back. For some reason, whenever I leave a meeting, my mic switches to a different sound. Very strange. All right. Make this smaller. All right, so I can see a lot of you now. Let's see how many people are back. It's kind of fun because people accidentally click on leave meeting as opposed to leave breakout room and just abandon class. And then they decide, you know what, I'm not here. Might as well just not come back. So we had 40 something before, and now we have 41. So lost a few people. No big deal. Okay, so what do we get? What's a fact?
It takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds for sunlight to reach the surface of the earth.
Okay, 8 minutes, 20 seconds, sun to earth. Okay. I don't know what the T is on sun there, but okay. So why is that a fact?
You can measure it, it's you can test that theory and come out with a conclusion. There's a quantitative data that backs it.
And it's verifiable?
Yeah, so it's when we talk about things like that, we can prove. So if we measure it, then we test it, then we can find a consistent answer. But wait a second. Has anybody ever actually measured it?
Us specifically, or just somebody in general, in the history of.
We know how fast light goes because there are people with these giant tunnels down in the bottom of New Mexico that can shoot electrons from one end to the other and measure the time it takes for the electron to get from one end to the other end. And they calculate the speed of light, literally measuring it each time. But so if we can measure something, we test it and get a consistent answer, do we say that that's a fact?
I would say no, because there's different variables sometimes.
So the word variable comes into mind. Okay, we're going to talk more about this coming up. A variable, I'm going to put the chat up here just in case, because the little chat box turned green. Okay, so it says prove with evidence. Okay, so testing is evidence, right? Testing is evidence. The problem is that when we try to say something is a fact, we're saying that every time we test it, we're going to come up with the same answer. Does that happen even in physics? No. Why not?
Because there's different variables each time.
So can someone tell me what a variable is, what the word variable means?
Something that affects the outcome.
Okay, so that's a behavioral science word for variable.
Something that's not consistent.
Yeah. Something that is not consistent or something that changes is considered a variable. Okay, and in behavioral science, we have lots of variables because I'm going to put a word up here which I really like that means a lot in this class, which is not nearly dark enough to actually see. Hold on, make it bigger. We use the word noise. It's like, so some of you try and talk and try to big, and we get this back out when you try and talk. And that's, so there's too much noise in the signal. Valerie right now on my computer is extremely pixely. You're very bumpy around the edges on my computer. So that means that there's a lot of noise in her image. Okay, Michaela's got a very good internet connection. There's very little noise in your image. Dominique has a good one. Alexis, you have epic internet. I'm gonna guess that you have fiber. Okay, and Sophia, your internet is also pretty good. And so I can look at this and I can see the noise in the signal. Okay, Summer's got a little bit gurgly internet. Mia's got good internet. Okay, Chantel's got some pretty good internet. And I can tell by the amount of noise, how variable the signal is. And how variable the signal is depends on a lot of different things in our environment. And so these are something that we have to really pay attention to, especially in this class. Because, okay, so someone else give me some more facts.
There's 7 continents.
Okay, so how do you know?
Because of maps.
Well, oh, because of map?
Mm-hmm.
What year did you look at said map? No, does it change depending on the year of the map?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really fun to look at the old Spaniards maps because they were like, there's 2 continents, us in Africa. And it's like, oh, okay, nothing past Russia, nothing past, that's it. They didn't know about the other stuff on the other side of the oceans. Okay, and so the idea of a map is biased. A map is biased data. Has anybody ever been to all 7 continents? Ooh, that would be exciting. Europe, United States, Australia. I got 3. Anybody got more than 3?
Did you say Asia?
I have never been to Asia. I've been to Australia.
Oh, places you've been, my bad.
Yeah, those are the 3 that I've been in my, so I've been to 3 continents. Does Canada count? No. Mexico? No, same continent. Okay, so from my perspective, there's only 3 continents that I really care about, the ones that I've been to. And I went to Australia when I was like 14, so I really don't expect to remember much of it, other than that I was 14 and annoying. Like someone else I know in my house who just got up at 11 o'clock. Anyway, so, okay, so what else? Give me some other facts.
The world is round.
Unless you're a flat earth person.
Venus is the only planet that spins clockwise.
Is it?
Yeah, I read that once.
Cool. I know that
It's like the slow. I think it's like this one of the slowest like spinning planets. So it goes clockwise, while the other ones go like anti-clockwise or counterclockwise.
Doesn't it also rain diamonds?
Sure. No, it has, the atmosphere is super heavy sulfuric acid. And so it probably has a lot of carbon precipitate in the rain because it dissolves from the surface. But I would say, yes, it does rain diamonds because if you go there, you'll dissolve pretty quickly and as hot as a hot oven. So we're going to Mars. Mars is cooler, literally and figuratively. I can't wait till they launch the helicopter in Mars. I'm really excited about that. Fly around. Sorry, you don't care. Okay, so, but how do we know these facts? How do we know these facts?
Because they've been observed and measured.
I guarantee none of you have observed and measured these things.
NASA does it for us.
Most of us search for facts on Google. So most of us collect our data through a secondhand source or a third source or even a fourth source. Okay, and so when we start talking about primary versus secondary versus tertiary or quaternary sources, okay, this is something that's really important. What is a primary source?
Where the information originally comes from.
Yeah. So my neighbor is a primary source scientist. Her name is Susan Powell. She is a professor of psychiatry at UCSD, and she studies rats' responses to different pharmaceuticals. So she gives the rat a particular pharmaceutical, and then she scares the rat, boo, and measures how much the rat gets scared. Ah. It's not very exciting work. But what it does is it tests the efficacy of some of these chemicals in changing what we call the startle response. The startle response is, if any of you have a very good startle response, in other words, you get scared very easily, very often, you increase your probability of having anxiety. Why would you have more anxiety if you startle easier?
Because you start to anticipate it from it happening so much.
Your body, your physiology goes from 0 to 10 faster than someone like myself who doesn't startle very much. For myself, I don't startle very much. So like when something scares me, I'm like, ooh, that's scary, versus my wife is, ah! She suffers from more anxiety than I do because I think about things that make me nervous and scared. She reacts and then thinks. So the difference between the two has a lot to do with the likelihood of suffering from anxiety. So what she does is, my neighbor Susan, she tests these chemicals and how the rat's brain responds to these chemicals. Chemicals that slow down the startle response show in humans they're much better at producing anxiety. Or sorry, reducing anxiety. You don't want to take drugs that produce anxiety. That's not a good thing. Unless you do, and then you drink a lot of coffee and then it's awesome. Okay, so this primary source, but when she publishes her data, who reads it?
People who read academic journals?
Well, the other people in the departments of psychiatry that are interested in studying what she's doing. I guarantee none of you will ever read any of Dr. Susan Powell's work. But then, I think it was last summer, 2 summers ago, there was a TED Talk about the effectiveness of not GABA drugs, what's that stuff? Ketamine on anxiety. And so this TED Talk about ketamine and anxiety is a secondary source.
What is ketamine?
Ketamine is a cat tranquilizer. So this person on TED was talking about ketamine and its effects on trying to reduce the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And ketamine is a very mild sedative hypnotic tranquilizer. It blocks the effects of a neurotransmitter called glutamate in your brain, and it causes your brain to slow down. It turns out that in low doses, ketamine seems to have a good effect on reducing anxiety and symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Comma, in high doses, you end up just drooling on yourself and sitting and staring at a wall for 5 or 6 hours. It's hard to overdose on. You generally don't stop breathing with it. That's why they use it for cats. Cats are very, somebody had their cat as their person on their screen. Cats have a very high metabolism, so you got to be careful with giving them tranquilizers because they'll fight it and fight it and fight it, and then all of a sudden just go, and then you got to be careful with that. Our cat had dentistry once, and she was all whacked out on goofballs for like 6 hours. It was pretty funny. She's looking at me like and drooling, and it was awesome. Okay, sorry. So a secondary source refers to a primary source. So far, so good? What about a third-party source? What do they refer to?
The secondary source.
They say, oh, I watched a TED Talk that talked about this, right? And then we get to social media. What do they refer to? Luckily, we don't have anyone in our government that listens to social media before they listen to data, because that would be bad. But what happens with social media? Who do you listen to?
Usually the loudest people in there, the most
Not the
opinionated.
loudest, the
Most opinionated, I guess.
yeah, or the highest frequency.
Yeah.
Like on my phone, I don't have any social media on my phone anymore. The only thing I have right now is the little feed that comes up on the side. And look, the first thing is about bicycle tires. The second thing is about coronavirus. The third thing is about solar flare-ups. And what else? And then something about phones, fly fishing, about Gmail, some person in Idlewild missing, more phishing stuff.
Wait, I have a question.
Sure.
For the stuff that comes up as like most popular, is that because like people are searching those things, or like they're just talking about those things? Like that's, and
So
I guess most
Artificial intelligence.
It's
Your phone listens to you 24/7.
artificial
Wait,
intelligence
did you say
algorithms.
Sophia?
It's artificial intelligence that listens to you 24/7. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
notice that like there's like videos
The
of like
iPhone.
Alexa like randomly listening to your conversation.
Same with like the
Crazy.
iPhones. You like think of something and then all of a sudden it shows up and it's like on Amazon for you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's so what they do is they use algorithms. Social media uses algorithms. They don't hide the fact that they use algorithms. Mark Zuckerberg went on the Congress and said, yes, we use algorithms. We help focus what you're interested in on what you're interested in, so you don't waste time looking at things you're not interested in. It's really funny. I have a really good friend that I grew up with who is a huge A, Bruce Springsteen fan. B, he's also extremely conservative, and he's a big Trump person, and I don't do Facebook anymore, so I don't have to deal with his stuff anymore. But what's funny is that as soon as I made friends with him years ago on Facebook, when I was on Facebook, what started showing up in my feed?
Trump stuff.
All the stuff that he likes starts showing up on my feed. And the same thing with Instagram. All the stuff that my son liked on Instagram starts showing up on my feed, because I had like 4 or 5 people I follow on Instagram. And so whatever they liked started showing up on the things you might like. And so it's interesting how what the social media doesn't actually go back and look at any sources whatsoever. Social media looks at the most frequently posted thing. So this is how a lot of facts get thrown around on social media. Someone posts something about it, somebody retweets it, someone posts it on a different platform. The algorithm says, oh, this is being talked about a lot. Therefore, it pushes it toward the top of somebody else's. And what happens is things that are complete nonsense become conscious, and they start developing a life of their own. And their
So
consciousness,
it's a big game of telephone.
it's a very big game of telephone. But the reason why is every time somebody reads something or posts something. So I want you to keep this in mind, because this is what's really important. And I'm going to show you how to be a better media consumer. I get sucked into this stuff just the same as everybody else, because I have the same consciousness that everybody else has. But I want to use this, the whole point of this class today is to talk to you about how to use statistics, how to use what we're going to be doing all semester to become more primary source like, not to be a voice of randomness on the internet. Now, don't get me wrong. I love randomness on the internet. It's very entertaining. We call it the rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole of internet is wonderful, where you click on something and you start scrolling through and going down 16 layers of following a story. That at the beginning of the coronavirus, it was that the tests were causing coronavirus. That it was a government conspiracy that if you get tested, that's how it spreads. Because everybody who gets tested, people who get tested positive more frequently. Yeah, okay. You can think that through for a few seconds and you start to realize what's going on. So I got distracted by myself, sorry. Okay, so how do we become a media consumer? How do we use this properly? How do we avoid this? What do we do?
You try to find where the data or the information is coming from, and just do some research yourself if you can, I guess.
Yeah, so the first thing that you should try and do is try to figure out where the primary source is. So this is the hard part, because where is a lot of the primary source for a lot of the stuff that you see on social media? Where is it?
Someone's Twitter thread.
Sadly, the primary source feeds back to the social media. Even our chief of staff for national security was retweeting information about Pizzagate. And remember Pizzagate? Oh, when life was a little bit more simple. Pizzagate was a conspiracy theory that is spread by something called QAnon, that the Democratic Party is really trying to undermine the bastion of the United States by, what are they doing? Oh, cannibalism, pedophilia, and sex slavery in order to run a deep state. And so they said that Hillary Clinton was in charge of a child pornography ring that was being run out of this pizza place in New Jersey. So a gentleman who follows this showed up with a shotgun and pointed it at the people working at this poor pizza place and said, "Let the children go." So where did this come from? Where did it start from?
I guess a person in power retweeting something that wasn't necessarily true. And then that person who brought the gun to the pizza place just didn't fact check anything. I don't know.
So that's on the screen right now is
right? Was it like,
for the first time recently humbly asked you to defend wikis, and 90% of our readers don't give, they simply look the other way. I'm going to look the other way and not give. Okay.
Yeah, according to QAnon, it was John Podesta and Hillary Clinton's email.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Of course. So what's interesting about this is that it starts with just a random tidbit of information. It starts with some random clickbait. Somebody shares it and somebody else shares it and somebody else shares it. And eventually it starts becoming a topic of conversation. And because a topic of conversation, therefore, people start looking into it. And when they search for it, what do they find? Do they find data, or do they find more people talking about it?
They find whatever's trending.
Whatever's trending. Okay, and so this is the whole thing about this is that the poor pizza place was like, hey, we haven't trafficked kids for years. That was a long time ago. It was just once. No, I was kidding. But they're like, what's going on? They had no idea they were a part of this conspiracy theory. But people were full on believing in it. And to the point where they were risking people's lives. Same thing with the shooter down in Texas, is that there was a war going on And these Latin American folks were migrating across the border to slowly take over the United States. And it's his job as a soldier of the United States to fight this invasion. So he went to a Walmart in Texas and shot up a bunch of people. Happened to be of Latinx origin. And how do you fact check stuff? Can normal people just fact check?
I feel like, sure. I mean, I feel like if you're looking at something and you go to like credible sources and you look where the information's coming from, if it's like from a reliable source.
Okay, so credible and reliable. This is a really hard thing to do. What is a credible, reliable source? Oh no. Back in my day, we had this thing called the news. What was the news?
A place where you'd get your information of what's going on in the world.
A journalist is someone who is a secondary source. A journalist goes out and collects data and interviews primary sources to try to figure out the story. So like if there's a car accident, what would be a primary source of information about that car accident?
The person involved in the accident or the police officers that are
The
people,
paramedics.
Paramedics, traffic cams. That's why the idea of filming things that happen on your phone, it's actually a good idea, because what happens is the officer will say something, the person being arrested will say something, the person with the phone goes, "This is what happened." And then the news will edit the video a little bit and just show a part of it, so they don't see the exact whole thing that happened. You just see a part of it. But the news is the goal is to try to get to the heart of the story. However, back in the old days, we had 3 news stations. We had the local TV news, and then we had the national news, and we had 3 stations. And no one ever watched PBS News because it was really boring. We always watched the local news because we knew the people. Anyway, but the idea that journalism is going back and looking for primary sources, but what's even my trusted source of information, my KPBS, which I listen to all the time, are they bias free?
No.
No.
No. There's a strong liberal bias to NPR, National Public Radio. But I'm annoyingly liberal, so I listen to it and I go, yeah, that's right. My mother-in-law, before she passed away, was a very loyal Fox Newsist. She was also a very moral person, so it would be very interesting to see how she would have thought about Trump. But it's a hard sell, because is CNN biased? Absolutely. And so is MSNBC. I think MSNBC even further biased than CNN. It's like I turned on CNN a couple weeks ago. We don't have cable, so it was at my father-in-law's house, and it was like, Trump sneezed today, spreading coronavirus to 70 people. I'm like, what? We don't care. But at the same time, they had like film of Melania not holding his hand getting off an airplane for like 20 minutes. My wife won't hold my hand either. We're happy. Just saying. Okay, especially today because I forgot stuff in her lunch. Okay, moving on. So, but journalism shouldn't be biased. But why is journalism becoming biased?
Because they want to control the narrative. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, no, that's possibly. Since CNN started and since Fox News started, they are controlled by individuals. And those individuals have an agenda in which they want to push the journalism. And they're biased.
Just manipulate the story so that it can become more of like an attention getter for people to actually listen to it.
And sadly, the people that are in charge aren't trying to do what's right. when I say right, equal, and just for all, what they're trying to do is make the all living dollar. And these organizations are for profit. Now, NPR is not for profit. It's a public organization, but it does have a base of listeners that are academics. And most people who listen to NPR are also into education. They're more likely college educated. They're more likely to be white. They're more likely to fill, well, my demographic, my people. Okay, and what's funny about this is that it is biased toward what I'm interested in. There's a lot more LGBTQIA2+, fill any acronyms I missed, topics on NPR than there are in any other station, because my people find that stuff interesting and acceptable to talk about. You don't hear much about LGBTQ stuff on Fox News because you're going to sit and eat that, Crystal? So I'm just going to sit and just look at you eat that and just... Okay, sorry. Especially with the Tapatio on it. Come on, it's just killing me. Okay, sorry. Now, getting back. But the idea of journalism that we try to understand, or we try to really figure out, is that you have to understand where the biases are. And that's actually one of the most important things to know when you're looking at data, is to look at where the biases are. Okay, so we can show you how to manipulate data, and I can show you how to lie with data, because we're statisticians now. And this is what we do. Can you change the way that you report data to make it sound better?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's data, it's facts. You're a primary source. But depending on how you present the data, depends on how people interpret what you're trying to say.
Is it not only how like you represent the data, but also how like your audience, like how you, what audience you have and how like you get the message to them?
And it's sadly a lot of what you will do in the reason why this class is so important for your future as a human being is because I'm going to start trying to teach you to think like a statistician, not to think like a normal person. And there's a couple very simple questions that you have to ask when you look at data. And those very simple questions that you have to ask is you have to look at the basic elements of what they're trying to say. What is the primary source? What is the actual data saying? And you can easily misrepresent data by not presenting it properly, or purposely misrepresent data by not reporting it properly. Okay, so as a consumer, we want you to be able to see through this and how to look for primary sources. There's a really fun website called Snopes. Anybody looked at that one? They're basically a fact-checking website. And what they do is they go around and they just kind of, someone says something. And I love the fact checkers. Whenever like the Democratic thing was going on this last couple of days. And so whenever any senator says something, there's a trained fleet of chimpanzees with search engines looking for the actual data that supports what they're saying. And it's really funny because some senator came out, said that she had Native American background. Anybody remember this? Yeah, I'm part, such and such. And so everybody started Googling around and found her lineage on Ancestor, and she didn't have any Native American in her. And it's like, okay, so fact checking. Okay, so, but we don't have the resources to be Snopes. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to look at the data that we have. And where did the data come from? What does the data look like? Okay, so okay, brace yourself. This is exciting. Okay, we'll sit and all watch Crystal finish her burrito. And okay, sorry. Is it an omelet or a burrito? Okay, burrito. Okay, I read lips. It's good. Okay. Okay, so especially burrito. So what's data? Come on.
A collection of information.
But what makes data data?
From like a experiment.
Doesn't have to be from an experiment. Can be just from observations.
Information that represents something.
Ah. First thing is data is representation. We collect data and represent it in the form of empirical. What does the word empirical mean? I wrote the hashtag above it. It's not a hashtag, it's something else.
With numbers?
Numbers. Data is some sort of representation. In this class, everything has a number with it. So if I use the 1991, what does that data represent?
Could be a year.
Could be a year.
It could be.
Could be by weight. No. But so if I say 1991 to 1997, that represents an empirical year or a date. What if I put a 1 or a 0? What does that mean? What could a 1 or a 0 mean?
Like for coding?
Ah, coding. Okay, so 1 is yes, 0 is no. So what does a 1 mean? Somebody say yes.
Yes.
Yes, correct. Good job. Thank you. And so if I ask you a question and you answer yes, I put a little 1 next to your name. If you answer no, I put a little 0 next to your name. Is that data represent your answer?
Yes.
Somebody said when we were talking about facts, one of the people in our group said married. So we could say 0 and 1, no and yes. It bugs me to have it the opposite way, by the way. I did it by accident. So married and yes, married. It's kind of one of those things. It's a yes or no answer. And so what we have is we have data, empirical representation. Okay. And so when we have empirical representation, we can then describe it. So far, so good? Well, there's a kid standing on the screen. Oh, he's off the screen. Okay. I'm very distracted by Crystal's life in general. Okay, so as we look at this, data is a representation of something. Okay, what about this? It's gonna catch up. What about this? How are you today?
Good.
Good. So where's good?
You can put it in the middle, I guess.
So I'm gonna put it in the middle. So as soon as I say good here, so 10 is super delistic fantastic, and 0 is shut up. Okay, and so why do I have why put a 5 for good as opposed to just saying good?
Because you can't measure good, but you can measure empirical data by using numbers.
Yeah, so you can't measure good. You can't measure how good something is, but you can say on a scale of 1 to 10, how was your day? It's a 5. But for me, a 5 is pretty bad. Most of my days are 7, 8, 9. Because for me, good means awesome. But that's just my personality. And I haven't had too many 1s, 2s, and 3 days. Every so often I have a 1, 2, or 3 day. But the idea is that when we have this scale, I'm going to write the word here. When we have a scale, scales are really important. They're different than categorical. Categorical data is boxes. Married, not married. What's one that we do for high school? I saw stuff pop up in the chat. Chris, yeah, because there's a range. The difference between category and scale is that scales have a range. Okay, and that the categories of things are individual boxes that you get put into. So can somebody think of a category that's got 3 categories that don't necessarily have a scale to them?
Like married, divorced, and widowed.
There you go. Married, divorced, widowed, single. 4. Is one any more than the other? Can you like add? No, it doesn't make any sense. The numbers don't represent the value of anything. A scale, they represent value. A category represents a group. Okay, so this becomes important. We just have to talk about this. What about a year though? What about a year? What does it represent?
Amount of time.
Yeah,
Or
amount.
Time passed.
It measures the amount. So last year, we did a really kind of fun lab, is I brought in these giant tub of Play-Doh, right? It was so great. And some of my students are very artistic with their little Play-Doh creations that they made by the end of the time. But what I had my students do is I had them measure out 300 grams of Play-Doh. 100 grams and 5 ounces or something. I forget what it was. So I had them guess how much 100 grams was of Play-Doh. So why is grams something that is an actual amount? This is really boring, but sorry. Why is grams an actual amount? It's not a scale.
Because you will get an exact number when you measure it.
Yeah, it's a continuous, what we call a continuous range of scores. It's the amount of something. Your age is a scale and continuous. Why is it a scale and continuous?
Because it's how long you've been alive and where you are at a certain point in your life.
And as the number goes up, what happens with your age?
Changes.
It changes proportionally with as it goes up.
Yeah, it increases.
I'm not getting any older. I'm staying the same age as I am right now. It's an old people joke. Okay. So the idea is understanding whether you have categorical data, scale data, or this continuous, that's an amount of stuff data. That's actually really important to understand. I'm going to put one other thing up here, which is really important. This word ordinal. When you are thinking about data, when you try to design an experiment later on in the semester, and you're trying to think about how to show your data, you have to decide if the order is important. Is the order in which the scale is presented important? So for example, what if I said, okay, everybody, 0 is good and 10 is bad. How was your day? So what if someone chooses 5? Is that the same as a score of 0 to 10 or from 10 to 0? One of my students did this last year with their research methods project. Half the scales where 0 is good and 10 is bad. The other half of the scales, 10 was good and 0 was bad. Does anybody see a problem with that?
It starts to get confusing if you have like a 7 because you're not sure if that means it was a pretty bad day or a pretty good day if you don't know like a consistent answer to which one's good and which one's bad.
Yeah, because the question have to have some sort of order to them. The questions have to have good ordinal data. Because if the data is ordinal, then the scale makes a lot more sense when trying to replay it to other people. So I'm going to show you some data in a little bit here, and then we'll see which ones are ordinal versus which ones aren't, and if it makes sense, like the amount of times that people brush their teeth. I think I have that data. And we have other stuff like that. So it's ordinal. So a low number means not brushing your teeth very often, and a high number means they brush their teeth very often. Please brush your teeth. Okay, so here's the next part. What is the most important number that you know? This is so great. You'll love this. It's so important they call it n. Most important number that you know is your n.
Isn't that like an unknown variable?
Nope.
No.
It has to be known. This is super easy. N means number of. So if I ask a question, what's your n? You're going to answer the number of people in your particular sample. So I did this example last time, and it didn't work very well. But what if I say that 50% of my Native American students aren't doing well? What's the first question that you need to ask?
How many students you
How
have?
many students?
How many Native American students do you have? Well, the answer this semester is 2 so far. So who's not doing well? One of them. So does it change the meaning between 50% aren't passing versus but one of the two aren't passing? Yeah. 17% of Cuyamaca College students are of African American or considered Black. Okay, 17%. So does it matter if we have 10,000 students or 500 students? Does that make a difference of what campus looks like? Yeah, because if 17% of lots of people is a lot more people. Wow, that's brilliant. Thanks. So the N is a really important thing to pay attention to. You hear people being talked about in percents a lot. Percent is not good unless you know your N. From every single time that we have a data set from now till the end of time, always report your N. What is the sample? Sample size. This is hugely important. And in fact, sadly, most of the research that we do, the only statistic that you report is N. Nothing fancy, nothing exciting. So if I wanted to ask how many people in class are married, am I going to take the average number of married people? Would that make sense? Why not?
Well, wouldn't it be because if there was like 10 like married students and then you did the average, you would have to like divide, right? So then it would end up being like less. I could be wrong.
We ask you if you're married or not, and we get a 0 or a 1, right?
Yeah.
what we want to know is, what is my n for 0 and what is my n for 1? Anybody know how to show that on a graph? It's really easy. So I get to play with the pens. What do these slices represent on this little pie chart? It's really easy.
Married versus unmarried people.
Yeah. That's it. Super simple. This is what most statistics are. Counting the number of. If you're counting the number of a category, all I have to do is show the n in each group. That's it. If you have 2 or 3 groups, pie charts, on point. You can easily see by looking at this graph without knowing any statistics, are there more married or unmarried people in class?
Unmarried.
Unmarried. How do you know that so fast? How do you do math so well?
I enjoy pie.
I like pie. I want the bigger piece of pie. That's what it is. Okay, and so it's super easy. There's actually a statistic called chi-squared. We'll talk about this later in the semester. We'll actually calculate those soon. But chi-squared are basically asking about frequency. Frequency. Most of the stuff that we do is about frequency. How many people who? So the first thing that you look at, the first piece of data that you look at is you look at this idea of frequency. Sadly, we spend all semester talking about the stupid idea of frequency. That's it. So why do we need so much information to understand frequency? Because there's a lot of different ways to calculate it and a lot of different things that we get involved when talking about frequencies of things. And as a data consumer, you have to understand what is the sample size. For most conspiracy theories, can you actually find any data? So how come the conspiracy theories can become so interesting?
Because of how crazy they sound?
Because how crazy they sound. There was an economics professor at Cuyamaca a couple years ago. He actually worked here for many, many, many years. But he was convinced that there's this thing called the Illuminati. Ooh. And the Illuminati was really controlling our government from behind. Anybody know where the Illuminati idea came from?
Germany.
Back in the old days, when we used to build castles and things, the most important people in society were these people called the stonemasons, people who built castles. And so these folks came up with this idea that maybe these Freemasons, these people who build castles, are really actually running the government. And if you don't treat the Freemasons well, they'll build you a shoddy castle that when you get attacked will fall down. So this idea of this conspiracy theory, my daughter got a scholarship from the Freemasons. And we went to one of their meetings and got to get this scholarship, which was actually turns out to seemed like a really big deal, but it turned out to kind of be weird. But that's okay. She still got the scholarship. So what the interesting thing about it is that this Freemason society is like a secret society. You have to like go through all these things in order to get in. You have to be recommended by members and everything else. And some people think that they're linked to this Illuminati. But at the same time, is there any proof that the Illuminati exists? Well, Trump got elected. See? Illuminati. And there's 3 or 4 people that are supporters of the QAnon who are now running in Congress. See? So the question is what's your sample size? And this is the fun part. The first step in any part of statistics is I ask you, what is your N? What is your sample size? And if you don't have a sample, what do you say about the data? If you can't find where the data comes from, what do you have to say?
Not true.
It's not true. And then I always say, and this is something that I do all the time, show me the data. So in the last, I'm going to pull this up really quickly here. We're going to look at Florida here. Okay? And we'll take a break here in a minute. Because after watching Crystal's burrito, my stomach is growling and I have to eat something. Because I forgot to take a break, and so I didn't get to eat anything. Okay, just give me a second. We're going to look at Florida. While zooming, my computer is slow. All right, why don't we take a break while my computer loads? So I'm going to go to here and then pause recording.